Let's look at the four levels of prompt engineering and why prompting and understanding how to do so is so important. I was thinking about whether or not to make this video because there's a ton of different how to prompt videos on YouTube. But I think one thing that's missing from those videos is a real life or practical example of an output that you get with a quote unquote bad prompt versus an output that you get with a good prompt. And I don't know if y'all have been following the news lately, but there have been a ton of layoffs at companies. And the reasons that they're citing have to do with the efficiencies that they're getting by using AI. So, I'm not trying to fearmonger, but your job will not be replaced by AI, but it'll be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. Let's look at a few different elements of what even makes up a good prompt. The way I think about it is the anatomy of a good prompt has certain elements to it. And here I've listed out what some of those elements look like. This isn't to say that your prompt will need to include every single one of these elements for it to be a quote unquote good prompt, because what we're going to talk about later is good is so subjective and context dependent on what you are working on. So I can't tell you what a good prompt is because I don't know what your specific use case is or what you're using that specific prompt to try and achieve. For this video, we're going to look at a real life example of, let's say that I process invoices. And when I process these invoices, that's obviously an extremely manual process. And I'm looking to find a way to implement something to make that way more efficient. Here's what we're working with. We have a messy invoice that comes in, say, every day or even multiple times a day. And if we think about this example that we're looking at, well, let's take a closer look. What makes it messy? Well, the date format is ambiguous. There's an inconsistent format in terms of how the decimals are laid out. The units are confusing because in some instances, we're using EA to represent each versus line totals. There's different lowercase letters, abbreviations, typos. There's missing currency symbols. And this last part, I think, is the most interesting. And I can't wait to show you guys what that prompt looks like. But the stated total doesn't even match the math. So the way that we're going to do this, guys, is we're going to look at 4 different levels of prompt engineering. And so when we start at level 1, that's going to be the quote unquote worst output that we get. And then that output will continually get better as we improve the prompt. The number one thing that I want you guys to take away from watching this or this video is understanding what a good prompt looks like, and that is completely dependent on what you are trying to achieve. So let's look at level 1. So for level 1, I say, hey, extract the data from this invoice. So if we take a look at what the model's response is, well, we have a few different issues with it. If we look, the prose or the language that pulls out is completely freeform. It's missing the quantities in price. The date format is still ambiguous. And the last point will be interesting, so keep a note on it, but it's not parsable. So parsable is a term used for when trying to understand if a set of data is readable by like software or a machine. And we're going to look at that for level 4 later. Now, if we jump to level 2, let's try and think about how we improve the prompt. Well, originally, all we said was, hey, extract the data from this invoice. Well, you know what? Actually, let's add a little bit of task context to this prompt so that the model or LLM understands what we're trying to accomplish or what this is even for. So I'm going to add, hey, this output feeds an automated accounts payable system. There's no human review. Additionally, to task context, I'm also going to add some rules so that we can clean up some of those issues that we called out when we looked at the invoice initially. For these rules, we're going to say, hey, please keep the dates in this specific format, keep all currency to 2 decimals, and have that currency always be in US dollars. Please validate any line of math and flag any discrepancies. So let's see what the output looks like now. Okay, so guys, look how much better this is. And I was gonna wait to call this out, but I just wanna call it out now. Look at this flag for the math check failing. So it looks like this invoice was submitted to us, and if we weren't careful, we would have completely missed that math in this invoice doesn't even add up. Now we're able to have a model or LLM check that for us so that when we make a mistake, this catches it and we don't submit an invoice that is wrong. So for this piece, flag any discrepancies and validate line item math. We have that part flagged here, which is great. We have the dates formatted nicely in exactly the way asked. And then we also have the currency all formatted to the same decimal place, which is just 2 decimals. So guys, if you think about it, look at this. This output compared to what we saw in level 1. The difference is literally night and day. And fundamentally, the easiest way for you to think about prompting a model is it can't read your mind in the same way that a human being can't. So if you hired an intern and you just asked it to extract the data from this invoice, well, that intern has no idea as to what context is important for them to be able to extract that data in a way that is most helpful to you and what you're trying to achieve. It's the same way with these models and LLMs. You just have to give them more information. Great. So that was level 2. Let's take a look. Let's throw a little bit of a curveball. Let's say that you want the model to show its work and to justify each decision that it made. The reason that this is important is because for everything that the model changes, you want to be able to understand why it made those changes. Here, what we have is an audit trail of the different changes that the LLM made and the reason why. What's so cool is for every decision, it cites the rule it applied. So now you have a glimpse behind the scenes as to it made change X because it applied rule 1. How interesting is that? This is important because for any mistakes that the model or LLM makes, you want to be able to understand why it made that mistake and where it got mixed up. And the more mistakes that it makes, the more changes you can make to continually make that model even better or that prompt even better over time. So this is why it's so interesting, because whenever you implement a prompt or an automation into a process, if you continually use the output that it creates as a feedback loop to make that process even better, it just gets significantly improved over time, which is amazing. Now, let's go into level 4. So let's say that for level 4, you want to be able to enforce some sort of structure for the output. And in this example, you want to be able to enforce a JSON schema that is enforced anytime the model runs. The reason you want to do this is because let's say that an invoice comes in, the LLM cleans it up, and then now it needs to be sent to a specific software. Well, when it gets sent to that software, it needs to be in a very specific format, and the fields need to be extremely black and white, and there can be no ambiguity because here accuracy is the most important. So for the prompt, we have everything from levels 1, 2, and 3. But now we have an output schema. And so this is just saying return JSON only and match this exact shape. And we're giving it the shape that we want that schema to come back in. And then the second part of the addition that we made is what's called pre-filled response. So here we're a message that says, hey, make sure your messages only start with this bracket. And the reason for that is because if there's any text before the bracket, that messes up the way that JSON is read. Now, I hope this real life example of looking through the different ways that you can write a prompt has made sense. And I hope this gives you some thoughts or ideas in your head of, I have these prompts that I use every day or every week. And now I have a little bit of a better understanding of how I can make them better. I'm Timothy. I work at a Fortune 500 company, and we use AI every day. I like making YouTube videos and just showing people what I'm learning at work. Thank you so much.